So there are some scholars whose work reminds us that culture is not merely the backdrop against which history unfolds, but the very ground upon which identities are made and remade. They show us that the stories we tell about ourselves through literature, performance, and everyday practices are also the stories that shape who we are and how we belong. For decades, Professor Ipshita Chanda has been one of the foremost voices in this conversation, guiding us to see South Asia not as a fixed entity but as a dynamic, living mosaic of traditions, languages, and imagination. A distinguished scholar of comparative literature and cultural studies, Professor Chanda's writings have consistently illuminated the complex interweaving of text and context in South Asia. Her scholarship reveals how identity is negotiated not in isolating but in relating across religion, regions, genders, and generations. By engaging with literature, folklore, performance, and the everyday, she invites us to understand culture as a continuous dialogue, where meaning is never static but always in motion. Professor Chanda's work has been remarkable in its ability to look at South Asian identities through both a local and a comparative lens, whether she is exploring women's writing and traditions or the shifting boundaries of community and belonging. Her scholarship demonstrates that culture is not simply inherited but constantly reimagined. She reminds us that the histories of South Asia are written not only in chronicles and archives, but also in songs, stories, gestures, and shared memories. Today, she brings us yet another profound theme: cultural change and South Asian identities. In this lecture, Professor Chanda asked us to reflect on how identities in South Asia are formed, transformed, and sometimes contested in response to cultural change. She challenges us to think of identity not as a fixed position, but as a process and ongoing negotiation reshaped by history, language, and imagination. In doing so, she shows us how the study of culture opens up new ways of understanding community, belongings, and difference in a reign as diverse and complex as South Asia. Beyond her scholarship, Professor Chanda has also shaped generations of students and researchers, encouraging them to see culture not as something to be merely observed, but as something to be engaged with, critically, empathetically, and imaginatively. To listen to her is to be reminded of the intellectual richness of South Asia and of the responsibility we bear engage with it deeply. On behalf of Voices from the Periphery, it is a profound honor to welcome Professor Ipshita Chanda. Her presence today reminds us that culture is not only what we inherit from the past, but also what we make in the present. And in reflecting on cultural change and South Asian identities, she invites us to see ourselves anew, more critically, more expansively, and more humanly. Man, up to you.
Thank you very much. That was at least 4.5 minutes more than I deserved. And I mean, since I really do not know what I'm going to say after this, because it'll just be, to a great extent, a repetition of what you said. Because indeed, I'm very touched by the fact that this is what I have been able to convey. And in fact, one of the reasons that I wanted to speak with you rather than speak to you is because I was very curious about the range of things that you have been doing, and I would say the humility in the face of all of it. And it has really led me, at least, to question to the extent which one can contribute to this conversation which has come thus far. And I mean, you did say something about the past and the present and engaging in the present. I just want to add that engaging in the present is in order to, in some way, craft the future. So, which I see, I mean, I see a way in which you are trying to do that, and which is what really interests me about the, well, just the way that I think you have imagined what the future is, because I do hope that you did. And I mean, till the very last minute, I'm still not very sure, after I've heard you, what it is that I'm going to say. Because eventually, I think, as you said, I find out of nothing other than experience. Even the category of identity to be getting even more and more destructive by the day because of its use and manipulation, especially in plural and stratified societies, which is what we inhabit, especially in the present, because, I mean, as you know, all around us, the future is struggling to be born. I mean, so what kind of a birth we who have lived for, 60 years, you suggested change. I think the change is to be produced, of course, by people like you. And I'm very curious to see what you have imagined about it. The two things that I feel that I can talk about, which might contribute to this direction, that you're claiming in some way that I charted out, which I don't know, I think it was history, in the sense that, as you said, I have lived in South Asia for almost 65 years. And so the change that I see is, of course, not always welcome, but one can see now how that change is engineered. And I emphasize that word because whatever will happen in the future, whatever you produce in the future, is going to be for a virtual globalized world. I will just not say capital because, I mean, both the virtual and the global suppose a particular level of capital and technology which are inherent in it. They're not possible without that. So the fact that I can speak to you wherever you are, across South Asia or elsewhere, and the fact that we can have this conversation is paralleled. We live in what Lyotard would have called a heterogeneous space, and between what we see and what we say. because of the difference in medium, but also because of the fact that, well, what we see is not necessarily what we are able to see. So, in that sense, the importance of virtuality, I'll just say as an instrument of poesis, and you're of course welcome to disagree, which is absolutely welcome. So the importance of virtuality as an instrument of poesis, strange as it may sound, is one of the things that I think, as a student and scholar of literature, I would want to alert you to. Because, I mean, it is facile to say that we make our own worlds. But it is so facile that we have forgotten to say it. So, I mean, we are quite happy to put theory or even sometimes philosophy in the place of our, well, in the place of our existence, which is in relation to the world. So I'm tempted to say, with the hindsight of so many years, that one of the first things that we need to say about living and working and thinking and being in South Asia is that we have to discard the paradigms that we have inherited through the structures of coloniality. And I think at that point I'm going to read a bit of what I've written. And yeah, so globalization and what Ngugi Wa Thiong'o, peace be upon him, called a neo-colonial affair, has in the recent past caused Paris and Nepal to burn at once, and populations to come out of their homes, protesting in different parts of the world for being economically and socially othered by global capital, or by the inclusion of the other even in the most soul-killing of jobs, proving that globally, sovereignty and democracy apparently cannot go together. One has to assert internationally what in interpersonal relationships is so vital: boundaries. And one needs to reinforce those boundaries through law, socialization, forced deportation, ghettos and concentration camps, prisons, death, and weaponize the virtual world, digitalization and artificial intelligence, to protect oneself from difference. That is contemporary South Asia in the aftermath of anti-colonial wars of independence and neo-colonial globalization of both pre-colonial and post-colonial stratifications. The fear of the other has structured society into simple existential questions. Who kills whom? According to Arundhati Roy also, who can love whom? The love laws, which refer, as we know, to caste, class, gender, and religion, peculiar to stratification in South Asia, peculiar also to the plurilingual and the pluricultural space that is South Asia. The colonial cultural policy of the British has influenced almost the whole of South Asia, because the British here were the civilizers and the structure builders. The status of South Asia as a set of rich economies turned into abject peripheries of the world system cannot but influence the perspectives with which we attempt to understand the political role played by identities in contemporary South Asia. They've been used to obfuscate and weaponize difference. You might also say that there are shared religions, but religions are practiced in plural society or in a majoritarian society. Whereas languages have a different politics, a conflict between themselves, but a common ambiguity towards the colonizer's language. Colonial language policies of standardization and homogenization systematically destroyed the radical democracy of language that prevailed in the Indian literary system, despite the monolingual, monocultural model of the nation state that European colonial contact introduced to the plurilingual, pluricultural, pre-colonial societies. I'll just read as long as I can. I mean, eventually I will not be able to read in two languages, but bits from different poems by Jacinta Karkata, who writes in Hindi, but well, that is not her Matribhasha. Her Matribhasha is Ho. She doesn't know Ho, so she writes in Hindi. Yeah. Talking about, plurilingual and pluricultural, pre-colonial as well as post-colonial societies. मातृभाषा को कैद कर दिया गया. और बच्चे, सॉरी, माँ के मुंह में ही मातृभाषा को कैद कर दिया गया और बच्चे उसकी रिहाई की मांग करते करते बड़े हो गए. The mother tongue was imprisoned and the children, while demanding its release, grew up. Language is the medium of our intersubjectivity, used by human beings to communicate with difference or express themselves to others for a purpose. This purposiveness shapes the phenomenological state of intentionality. Through language use, we construct the worlds we inhabit. What is the place of the other in this world? Language connects the worlds of the persons involved, doubtless according to some regulating fictions. The power of these constructions, which control our lives, leads to the naturalization of violence and oppression that we recognize as class division, caste discrimination, and patriarchy. Consequent upon valorizing the characteristics, I hesitate to call them qualities, that define the hegemonic gender roles in society. The very construction of humanity is a marginalizing operation designed to establish and strengthen powerful institutions and related discourses and keep them functional so that the power hierarchies can be maintained. मातृभाषा खुद नहीं मरी थी, उसे मारा गया था, पर माँ यह कभी जान ना सकी. The mother tongue did not die on her own. It was murdered. But the mother never came to know. Hegemonic masculinity is constructed in relation to various forms of social stratification, which includes the economy of gender. I argue that it also dislocates the center-margin dialectic through a perpetration of symbolic violence, which Pierre Bourdieu describes as naturalized in society by the power of the margin that dominates, creating what Lacan calls a phantasmatic reworking of history. As Bourdieu argues, while they offer resistances, even though weak, to the order, I quote, the dominated apply categories constructed from the point of view of the dominant to the relations of domination, thus making them appear as natural. It appears to me that the true basis of struggle over affirmative action is marginalization by identity. Affirmative action is meant to enable the marginalized to be seen as equal, whereas that is exactly what stratified caste society at large refuses to see. An ordinary man with a bomb or weapon is a mere terrorist. But if you add faith to the mix, and we have an entity that may not kill, but can incite increasingly larger numbers of people into thinking that they are doing their duty. By symbolic violence, which can be exercised, according to Bourdieu, only with that sort of complicity via the effect of misrecognition encouraged by denial, by those on whom that violence is exercised. All regulative social constructs are manipulated by hegemonic institutionalized forces. The power of these constructions, which control our lives, leads to the naturalization of violence and oppression that we have to start recognizing as discursive sites of power. Identities, for example, are relations between individuals and are only misrecognized as socio-political and cultural categories, however much we intersectionalize. Within this economy, the gender role of women is social. The gender role that women are socialized to play fulfills the demands made by patriarchal ideology. In the economy of capitalist patriarchy, gender roles are therefore institutionalized. To understand the way these relations work is more important than to draw boundaries of inclusivity or exclusivity around characteristics essentialized. Rather, we can operate with what Heidegger calls modalities. Edward Said describes critical consciousness as part of the actual social world and the literal body that the consciousness inhabits. I'd like to draw your attention to this very alluring phrase, literal body. I mean, it's nice to speculate what he would have meant. The individual mind's awareness is a worldly, self-situating, sensitive response to dominance, not historically and easily, merely as a child of culture, but a historical and social actor in it. But the social stratifications politicize difference and make it oppositional, conflictual, and signaling of enmity and hostility. The awareness of the individual in such a society is a form of agency. And thanks to the digital media, it is a dangerous form which the hegemonic powers are bent upon controlling. Phenomena like identity construction, presentation, and socialization form the economy of social stratification, which rule our life. These are human processes through which we constantly meet and have to understand others in society. Maybe in their own socius, within the larger group, in order to live in arts, media, history, in the interactive space created by socialization of gender roles, whether through convention, ideology, and the media, and in our actual life experience as men and women living, whether we like it or not, in relation to one another. The responsibility of the humanities or the human sciences is then to the uniqueness of human existence, which Merleau-Ponty sees as universal singularity. Each of us is unique, and that is common to us all. We exist, we live our lives through our relation with the other singular individuals and objects in the world, in society. Universal singularity underlies Merleau-Ponty's conception of ethics. He says, I quote, "It is in the dynamics of discourse that we most clearly see the inherence of the other in the self, the intercorporeal and intersubjective foundation of subjectivity. The central question is, how do our individual and shared lives act or react in the light of the discourses that construct our social institutions and conventions. Hence, how we name and signify, how we create what is called poiesis becomes the crucial reality for the world, given who controls narrativization, who is the poet. Hence, as a member of a post-colonial stratified society, this encourages me to propose, even with full sympathy towards the intentionality of resistance to hegemony, the replacement of the binary structure of counters. Hence, my construction of literature as an existential phenomenon which cannot occur without the existence of humans is not counter to the hegemonic idea of literature as object and commodity, but distinct from it, demanding a distinct vocabulary, which I submit is experiential. As Elena Sen, who wrote a book called A Space in the Struggle about tribal and working class women's struggles to enter the Indian feminist movement from the early 70s into the 80s. Elena passed away in the 20 teens, around 2018, 19. And she used to teach in the Mahatma Gandhi Antarashtriya Hindi Vishwavidyalaya in Wardha. And actively, she was an active organizer of the Mazdoor Kisan MKSS. Sorry, you need to look this up. It's memory fails. So, I'm saying all of this because that is inherent in what I'm going to quote from her. And that is, I quote, "Women and their circumstances should in fact be the central focus of the women's movement, instead of the concern with personal identity." In place of identity, shall we propose then relationality, connection, interaction? Does that not underline our lives in society, shared in a world of shared phenomena? नदियाँ ही जानती हैं, उनके मरने के बाद आती है सभ्यताओं के मरने की बारी. Rivers alone know that after they are dead comes the turn of civilization. Merely pluralizing terms like patriarchy or literature is not enough. The task is to map the ways in which woman as a category is being differently reconstituted within patriarchal relations of graded caste inequalities. In order to strike at the root of this senseless stratification, Ambedkar proposed the radical social methods of intermingling, overcoming entrenched barriers of imagined difference with reconstituting presence and hence reality. For humanities scholars, therefore, it is crucial to understand the construction of narratives, that is, poiesis, with its specific intentionality and specific form of address. Digital media co-constitutes the present conjuncture, characterized by the interface between the real and virtual digitalized world which we inhabit. The question then is how we think alterity. Different forms of the virtual are powerful, influential, and morally ambiguous aspects of our existence as they mediate and shape our relations, our consciousness, our experience of digitally permeated life world. The virtual manifests both connectivity and control, and homophily, or the drawing together of people in tight networks of like-mindedness, is ideal for the propagation of the majoritarian ideology as well as the necessary operation of demonizing the other. Our intentional relations with this digitally mediated world must include the dynamics of our relations with difference. Programmed user environment interfaces fostered by digital applications of various kinds, which we use, are technologies of communication, failing at expression because they cannot escape the perspective of the maker and limit the horizon of the user. The processes of remediation deriving from the power of the digital social media direct and control all narratives through the mainstream television and press. Fano, whose centenary we are observing with uncomfortable silences, said that blacks inhabit a zone of non-being, an extraordinarily sterile and arid region, an incline stripped bare of every essential from which a genuine new departure can emerge. However, Rohit Vemula refused to be limited by his identity. Society seemed to have no place for him beyond that. So perhaps a new society must emerge, not a new individual, and relationality will be its conceptual base. It is not a permanent equilibrium. It is not an object. And most of all, it is not utopia, but real life. As Ambedkar said, democracy will have to be protected and worked towards with alternative politics and a deeper moral discourse. I'll just end with a couple of quotes. One is from Hannah Arendt. Wherever men live together, there exists a web of human relationships, which is woven by the words and deeds of innumerable persons. Every deed and every new beginning falls into an already existing beyond even those with whom the agent will come in contact. It is because of this already existing web of human relationships, with its conflicting wills and intentions, that action almost never reaches its purpose. And it is because of this medium, intending quality of its unpredictability, that action always produces stories, with or without intention, as naturally as fabrication produces things. Conversation has been advocated as a way to encounter difference, at least since the doctrine of ahimsa, preached by Vardhamana Mahavir, fashioned into the philosophy of Anekantvad by his followers. The Maitri, preached by the Buddha and embraced by the Buddhists, form another form of engaging with difference without objectification, control, or domination. The philosophy of dialogue, though bound by formalist limitations and the vocabulary of surplus, was propounded by Bakhtin. And I quote Michael Oakeshott here, who says, moreover, the relationship between poetic images is itself a conversational relationship. They neither confirm nor refute one another. They merely evoke one another and join, not to compose a premeditated conclusion, but to compose another and more complex image of the same kind. I quote Said here, not Edward. To embrace pluralism is not to approve of practices or expressions of belief that are legitimately unacceptable to others. We have the opinion as a society to define our public space. We can make it into an inert space free of all subjectivity, or we can turn it into an intersubjective space. I think a healthy, positive society is characterized by the latter. What we must strive to create and sustain is a society in which relations between individuals and communities are structured by the concrete intersubjectivity of active cultural transaction. The humility to listen and the openness to hearing are also active cultural transactions with difference, in which untranslatability must be encountered and understood as unique and singular, as human difference, and the risk of engaging with and misunderstanding must be taken. We come to the poem, which I cannot translate into English. And I think it is untranslatable in English, though it may be translated into many other South Asian languages. अ से अनार लिखा, उन्होंने कहा आहा कितना सुंदर। आ से आम लिखा, उन्होंने आम के गुण गाए। अ से अधिकार लिखा तो वो भड़क गए। थैंक यू।
Am I audible, ma'am? Am I audible, ma'am? Okay. So, ma'am, I think you are mute, ma'am. Your mic is mute.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything. I finished saying.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Professor Chanda, for that truly illuminating lecture. Your reflections on cultural change and South Asian identities have carried us far beyond the boundaries of conventional history. You have shown us how culture is not a backdrop to identity, but its very heartbeat, how it shapes, transforms, and reshapes the way communities imagine themselves and one another. What struck us most is how you revealed identity as something never fixed, never singular, but always in motion, emerging through stories, performances, languages, and everyday practices. You reminded us that change in South Asia is not merely political or economic, it is also cultural, woven into the fabric of memory and imagination. In listening to you, we are compelled to see that identities are not inherited ones and for all, but continually negotiated, sometimes with resistance, sometimes with adaptation, and often with extraordinary creativity. You have shown us that cultural change is not only about loss or rupture, but also about possibility, the possibility of reimagining who we are and how we belong. For all of us gathered here, your lecture has been far more than an exploration of South Asian culture. It has been an invitation to think of identity as a living, dynamic process, one that challenges us to listen more deeply to voices across regions, generations, and traditions. With these reflections in mind, let us now open the floor for questions and dialogue so that we may continue to learn from you, Professor Chanda, and engage further with the depth and brilliance of your scholarship. Okay, so can I proceed to our question answer session, ma'am, from our YouTube audience? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so the first question is from Ayush. Yeah,
Yeah,
he is
he
asking
is
that
asking that
how do we
how do we
critically
critically
distinguish between
distinguish between
cultural change
cultural
and
change and
cultural
cultural
continuity
continuity
in South
in
Asia
South Asia
without
without
reducing
reducing
identity to
identity
either
to either
rupture or
rupture or
significance?
significance? Sorry, either what or what?
Either
either
rupture or
rupture
persistence.
or
Persistence, ma'am.
persistence. Well, I mean, I have this bad habit of asking counter questions. So my question would be, I mean, continuity is across time. So is change. And if something is ruptured, it cannot persist. So there is, in one sense, we are talking about similar matter. I mean, matter is not the word, but we are talking about similar, let's be Kantian and say categories. So continuity and change both occur or both involve the human consciousness of time. And rupture and persistence are done by human beings. So I don't see that these are necessarily, firstly, similar things. Secondly, it's not that they are not related, they are as categories. One is, continuity and change being temporal categories, and can only have meaning with respect to consciousness. So continuity and change being temporal categories, they are actually human experience. And I'll just stick my neck out and say that rupture and persistence are human actions. I would have said human will, but then there is also circumstance. So at the most, the human being either has agency in that situation or is forced to an action. That is the way in which I understand the question. So now, does the question remain is my question. Because I'm not used to thinking of any of these as abstractions. So I don't necessarily see any kind of opposition there. But I do see choice, yes. And I see human action in circumstance, conscious human action in circumstance. So, I know that doesn't answer the question. In fact, now I would want to know what the question is.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
For what, though?
Yeah, I will. That's from the your YouTube. That's why we have made connection with that. Okay, so can I proceed to the next question now? The next question is from Lucky. To what extent are scholarly accounts of fluid and hybrid South Asian identities themselves shaped by elite perspectives, potentially silencing subaltern or marginal voices?
If you mean hybrid very specifically to refer to Homi Bhabha, then completely. That is my answer. When you say fluidity of identity, what exactly, again, I'm sorry, but what do you mean? Because as you rightly pointed out, I don't think identities are fixed anyway. So the question of fluidity, they can be performed. So any identity can, in whatever Shakespeare said, and in one life he plays many roles, or whatever he said, in all the world's a stage. Although I really don't see things in a very complicated manner, I don't see any reason to see it in a complicated manner. I agree completely that when Bhabha is talking about hybridity, it is from a position of caste privilege, which enables him to have access to even the philosophy which he is contesting. And in that respect, I think he has, through our able assistance, spawned a whole generation of confusion. So I do agree that that is a blind to reality position. Absolutely. But as far as fluidity is concerned, I am not too sure how to understand fluidity of identity. I mean, I was born in one state, I lived in another state, now I'm living in another. And we all do that. What exactly are we talking about? Incidentally, we all have Indian citizenship while we are doing all this.
Okay. So the next question is from Prodip. Does the concept of South Asian identity risk homogenizing vastly different linguistic, religion, regional, and caste-based experiences into a single framework?
Absolutely. Completely. That's precisely what I was saying all the while. It's not even a risk, it's already done it. So it's a fact of academic, whatever you call it, life maybe. Institutionalization, I think I would call it. Yeah, that's what it is. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question is from Akash. He's asking, how can we address the paradox that while scholars emphasize the constructed and dynamic nature of identity, communities often insist on fixed, essentialist self-definitions as a mode of survival or resistance?
Self-definitions meaning?
I don't remember.
So this person can hear us, right? And so he can tell us what he means by self-definition, maybe, if he can send you a message or something. I mean, the simple answer to that is unfortunate but true, which is, I mean, I'm wondering whether to put it bluntly or whether to put it politely, but I don't know, it's easier to put it bluntly. Our own insecurity, actually, I mean, is very strange, as a matter of fact. So if self-definition is what I think you mean, then I agree that there is a contradiction there and it requires perhaps self-reflexivity, humility. Yeah, that is something that I was trying to obliquely say when I said that, you know, if we listen to other people who are not ourselves, I mean, we don't want to hear what we are saying from someone else all the time. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Aditi. She is asking, in what ways does globalization complicate or even destabilize our understanding of cultural change in South Asia? Does it create genuinely new identities or merely repackage older hierarchies in new forms?
Yeah, I'm in full sympathy with that question, but I wouldn't phrase it like that. First and foremost, you know, repackaging is done by either human beings or institutions. It doesn't come from God. So there is something political there. And the agency may not be mine, but it's not, you know, deus ex machina or any such thing. So I am either a victim of politics or I am participating, depending on where I am in the stratified hierarchy. Now, globalization, I skipped that bit about heterogeneous spaces, where on the one hand, I mean, you know, globalization, like I said, is a level of capitalized technology. So you require a particular level of capital and a particular nature of capital to enable virtual capital to work. So it's facilitated by digitalization, and it creates a virtual world. It creates, the marketplace is virtual. I mean, everything is virtual, basically. I mean, you understand that better than I do. So it's not only a change in South Asia that is engineered, it is a change across the world. That is one of the things that we mean when we say globalization. Our connection to all the networks of whether it is hegemony or resistance is facilitated by technology. And of course, you will say immediately, and you will be right, that to what extent are we able to access? Who is able to have access to technology? Yeah. So that part, I agree totally. But I mean, I will say the same thing again. The question of repackaging identity is very vague to me, because identity is not fixed. So the role you play within society, how you perform whatever it is that you are asked to do. I mean, management has a whole structuration of what you are supposed to do, and from there arise form letters and other such things. So, I mean, the whole discourse is repackaging your identity as a corporate person or as, I mean, and it is not, this is not new. This is absolutely not new. So, one is, yes, globalization has an impact, but it has a global impact. And the second thing is, well, to put in an old wine in an old bottle, I do not think identities are fixed anyway. So fluidity, repackaging, all of these are responses to reality. I mean, that is what makes, I think, a structure of feeling within which history is made.
Okay, madam. Next question is from Jyoti Prakash. He is asking, if as Foucault suggests, identity is produced through discourse or power or knowledge, then can we ever speak of authentic South Asian identities, or are they always already mediated by structures of domination, colonial, national, or global?
I mean, again, I absolutely agree with half the question, and the other half I fail to understand. Most certainly, I mean, there is no such thing as, not only authentic South Asian identity, there is no such thing as authentic anything. Because that institutes a standard, and all standards are historical and, well, I mean, one might even say geographical. So, that's that part. The other part, I mean, can you please read that other part again, the second bit, where the question actually is?
Yeah. Or are they always already mediated by structures of domination, colonial, national, or global?
I mean, obviously, because they are constructed in that context. So whatever context identities are constructed in by human beings will be mediated, whether we are talking about, Cro-Magnon man or sort of the Martian to come. I mean, sorry, not the Martian, the human to come, because we don't know anything about Martians. So, yeah. Always already is a clever trick by Derrida to note that it is the truth. We do construct whatever we think and say out of something that precedes us, and that something is a human capability called language, without which it is impossible for us to be. So, if we leave the always already out of it, then I agree, yes. Human existence is in society, and language is an intersubjective medium. That is why human beings have language, because there are others.
The last question is from Pialis. He's asking, following Homi Bhabha's notion of hybridity, can South Asian identities be seen as a third space that resists both essentialist tradition and Western modernity?
I mean, if you are partial to South Asia because we all live there, you are free to believe anything you wish. Because it has nothing to do with any form of reality. It's pretty metaphorical. I mean, if you refer to what Ricker is talking about when he says the third space, the translator inhabits the third space between, X and Y, between source text and host text and guest text. And he puts the translator in the middle. I mean, the translator still has to read and the translator has to write. Otherwise, translation does not occur. So, if the translator feels that she is in a third space, she is. So, like I said, you are free to construct your own world as long as it does not impinge on the worlds of other human beings violently. Why not? That is supposed to be something that plurality is supposed to open our minds to.
So, any other questions from our Google Meet audience? Okay. So, before we part this evening, Okay. So, before we part this evening, I used to offer my heartfelt gratitude to you, Professor Chanda. What you have shared with us tonight will not remain confined to these walls. It will continue to resonate within us, a reminder that history is never just about events and dates, but about the ideals, the struggles, and the imagination that give those events their enduring meaning. We are deeply cautious that we have been in the presence of one of the most remarkable scholars of our age, whose work not only reshapes how we understand the world, but also inspire us to approach history with greater humanity, responsibility, and imagination. On behalf of Voices from the Periphery, with the deepest reverence, I thank you, Professor Chanda, for this extraordinary gift of knowledge and existence. We are truly honored. With that, let us carry forward the spirit of this evening with gratitude in our hearts and with renewed commitment to the values and traditions that make history so profoundly human. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much.